It was just after 2:30 p.m. when the rain came down harder than before, soaking the scrub and stone of Talwara like a flood poured straight from the sky. The 6 seals were pinned in a dry creek bed, trapped between jagged rock and rising water, caught in a kill zone they hadn't seen coming. Gunfire echoed off the ridge above them, cutting sideways through the storm. Someone yelled into the radio, frantic and breaking, asking the question no one could answer. Who's shooting? Where's it coming from? One of them was already down, bleeding through his soaked camo. The others tried to move, crawling through cold mud, dragging their wounded teammate behind broken cover. But every time they shifted, another round cracked through the air, close enough to rattle the teeth. They couldn't see the shooter. The gunman had perfect elevation and patience. They were being hunted in slow motion, with no air support and no rescue coming. The closest quick reaction force was grounded, held back by 30-knot gusts and visibility that vanished before it reached the tree line. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. A single shot. Sharp, clean, final. No flash. No follow-up. Just silence. The hostile fire stopped. The sniper on the ridge didn't fire again. For a full 10 seconds. Nothing moved. And then, one of the SEALs whispered, the only thing anyone could think. That wasn't one of us. Later, they'd try to figure it out. Later, someone would review the logs, the radio chatter, the satellite feeds. But in that moment, all they knew was they were alive, because of a bullet no one expected. And it hadn't come from above the ridge. It had come from somewhere behind them, from someone none of them even knew was watching. Eliza Morales never stood out in the crowd at Forward Operating Base Kilo in Kundar province. At 5'1", she barely reached the shoulder of most of the Marines she worked beside. She moved through the sandbag corridors with a clipboard, a comms headset, and a quiet kind of focus that made her seem invisible to anyone not paying close attention. She was 26. With the rank of Petty Officer Second Class, her official role fell under Naval Intelligence. Her days were filled with data packets, drone footage, intercepted signals, and SIGINT analysis that made other people's missions safer. On paper, she didn't do anything exciting. She built mission briefs, she confirmed movement patterns, she stayed behind the wire. Most folks assumed she'd joined because she was good at language. Or maybe numbers. Some joked, lightly but often, that she was the kind of sailor who never touched dirt. They called her the screen reader, or sometimes just the analyst. Nobody asked what she scored at the range. Nobody bothered checking her evals from Great Lakes. If they had, they might have seen something strange. Eliza had posted one of the highest marksmanship scores in her training cycle. Her instructors wrote notes that used words like intuitive, unnatural control, and advanced under pressure. One of them had even flagged her for review by a special training unit. But the paperwork got buried when she was routed into intelligence. Out here, in Kundar, no one remembered that part. To everyone else, she was just the support girl, the one who brought weather updates to the TOC before dawn, and sat in the corner during mission briefs. Silent unless asked to speak. She never wore a plate carrier. She never went on patrol. But Eliza Morales had grown up with a rifle, and what the people around her didn't know was that behind the glasses and clean uniform, there was someone watching, someone listening, someone waiting for the moment nobody else could handle, and she would know exactly when that moment arrived. By the time the first call hit the operations center at FOB Kundar, the storm had already rolled in hard. Winds screamed through the valley at over 40 knots, ripping low brush sideways and choking out visibility. At exactly 14:45, a special operations channel lit up with clipped, urgent bursts from a team deep in Talwara. 6 Navy SEALs had been moving through a mountain corridor when they were ambushed by fire coming from the high face of Kodungat Ridge. One of them, Sergeant Alvarez, had taken a hit to the chest. His breathing was shallow. The medic was shouting over the comms, trying to keep him awake, as the rest of the team scrambled to drag him behind cover. The enemy shooter had elevation, concealment, and patience. He wasn't spraying rounds. He was picking his moments. Every time one of the SEALs tried to shift, a bullet snapped past them so close it cut fabric. The ridge gave the enemy a clear angle. No one could see him. No one could move. They were trapped. Command scrambled to respond. The weather made immediate air support impossible. The HH-60 Pavehawks at Bagram were grounded. Fast movers couldn't punch through the storm cell building along the border. Even AC-130 coverage was off the table. Gunships couldn't fly blind into mountains they couldn't see. On paper, the SEALs had no way out. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, multiple screens tracked the situation. Eliza Morales sat behind a terminal, flipping between infrared overlays, drone telemetry, and signal intercepts. From the outside, she looked like any other analyst. Quiet, focused, watching, but what she saw through the chaos was something no one else had noticed. On the north side of the ridge, tucked just below a dark line of rock, she spotted a signature, slight, static, just a faint sliver of heat that never moved far. A sniper's nest. It was the linchpin holding the whole ambush together. He had the high ground, and he was keeping the team pinned long enough to bleed out their wounded. No one else in the room said it, but they all knew what it meant. Without breaking that line, the SEALs weren't getting out. Not today, not alive, and there was no one left to make that shot, except maybe someone nobody expected. Before Eliza ever touched a military-issued rifle, she held a bolt-action, 243 inches, her hands at just 10 years old. The mornings in western Colorado were bitter and long, the kind of cold that made metal burn, skin and breath turn to ice in the air. Her father, Victor Morales, was always up before the sun. He never used an alarm. He didn't need one. Victor had served as an A-10 pilot during the Gulf War, though Eliza only learned that much later from a neighbor. At home, he never spoke about the war. He didn't brag, didn't show photos, didn't hang flags. He chopped wood, tracked storms, and taught his daughter how to read the wind like it was a language written for those who paid attention. On weekends, while other kids were still in bed, Eliza was kneeling beside him in the snow, watching a distant ridgeline. He showed her how to control her breathing, how to press the trigger after her heartbeat. But before the next one came, how to lie still for hours without twitching. She hated it at first. She hated the silence, the pressure, the feeling of never being good enough. But she also never forgot the way her father moved through the woods. Quiet, certain, like part of the terrain. When she was 12, she took down her first deer. Clean shot. One breath, one squeeze. Her father didn't say good job. He just nodded once. That was how he showed pride. By 15, she could outshoot most of the weekend hunters who came up from Denver. They teased her in the diner, called her Little Thunder, but nobody laughed at the range. Victor died when she was 17. They said it was a fall, but Eliza knew he wouldn't have slipped unless something else went wrong. The funeral was small. No uniform, no ceremony. He wouldn't have wanted one. She left home that fall and joined the Navy not long after. Everyone assumed she went intel because she was book smart. She didn't correct them. Combat wasn't the plan. She wanted to disappear into numbers and satellites, keep her hands clean. But when she held a rifle again during marksmanship evals, something old and familiar clicked back into place. The breath, the pause, the stillness. She never talked about her father in training, never explained why recoil didn't bother her, or why she already understood bullet drop before the lesson began. Because long before the Navy ever trained her, Victor Morales already had. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the mood had shifted from urgency to dread. The storm wasn't letting up. Every route to the trapped SEAL team was blocked. The drone feeds showed worsening wind shear. Rain danced sideways across the monitors, like static. Plans were being rewritten. Overruled. Abandoned. No air support. No line of sight. No time. Then Eliza Morales spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask permission. She simply said that she could make the shot. For a beat, the room froze. Lieutenant Daniels laughed first. Not out of cruelty. But disbelief. Like she'd just quoted a line from a movie. He shook his head and muttered something under his breath. No one else said anything. CMDR Harlan didn't laugh. He turned slowly, looked at Eliza, and asked her to repeat it. She did. The ridge, the sniper nest, the distance, her math, her wind read. The confidence in her tone wasn't arrogance. It was calm, calculated. Harlan stepped away from the main screen and pulled up the secure personnel archive. It took him less than 30 seconds to find it. Her file, the line most had never seen. Scout Sniper School, Camp Pendleton. Evaluated. Completed. Never assigned. She wasn't just support. She was a weapon hiding in plain sight. The room went quiet. Harlan gave her a nod. Not a command. A choice. Eliza stood, crossed the TOC without another word, and made her way to the armory. Most intel analysts weren't even cleared to touch the heavier long-range rifles. But she walked in like she'd been there 100 times. She selected a Remington MSR, chambered for 338 Lapua Magnum. The kind of weapon meant for one thing, distance. She ran her hand over the stock, checked the scope, slid in the bolt, loaded a fresh mag. 5 rounds. Clean, sealed. No one followed her outside. No one had to. She wasn't waiting for backup. She was walking toward the one shot no one else could take. From behind a desk to the edge of the storm, everything had changed. Not because someone gave her permission, but because she already knew what needed to be done. The rain had thickened into sheets by the time Eliza reached the ridge. Her boots sank into the mud with every step. Wind tugged at her hood and stung her cheeks. The Remington MSR rested against her back, snug and balanced. Its weight familiar but heavier somehow. Not because of the steel, but because of what she was about to do with it. She moved without hesitation, climbing toward a narrow ledge carved into the hillside. It wasn't much, just enough space for her body, her rifle, and the hope that the enemy hadn't seen her approach. At 15:58, she dropped flat against the cold stone and unpacked the essentials. She pulled out her Kestrel, measured the gusts. North-northwest, jumping between 38 and 43 knots. Temperature hovered just above freezing. Humidity close to saturation. Pressure falling. She adjusted the scope slowly, methodically, not guessing, calculating. Coriolis. Spin drift. Barometric pressure. Multi-altitude wind layers. She'd learned all this years ago. Not from the Navy, but from the man who used to stand silently beside her in a snowbank and ask if she could feel the air shift between breaths. At 16:14, she spotted movement through the scope, a shimmer of heat behind a wall of rocks. The enemy shooter was tucked into a natural cutout, nearly invisible from below. Only a sliver of shoulder and the barrel of a rifle showed when he leaned to track the SEALs. She radioed for a smoke marker. Just one. Dropped slightly off target. Not to confuse the shooter, but to read the wind at ground level. It landed a few meters south of the ridge, curling gray in the crossdraft. She adjusted again, not just for the wind, But for the gap between her heartbeat and the world, she watched. She waited. At 16:21, the enemy moved again, shifted to reacquire. He leaned just far enough, and Eliza stopped breathing. One breath, one silence, one squeeze. The rifle kicked gently. The round disappeared into the storm. 4.5 seconds passed. The shooter's body slumped backward. His rifle clattered down the rock. No more fire came from the ridge. Eliza stayed on target. Calm. No fist pump. No celebration. Just one more round, chambered, and a second shot placed into the same pocket of stone, confirming the kill. She held position, scanning, listening. The wind had not died. But in her mind, it had gone still. No one told her to return. No one needed to. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The moment the second shot echoed off the ridge, everything stopped. No more rounds came down. No muzzle flash blinked from the rocks. The silence held for just a second. Then the SEAL team began to move. With the shooter down, they scrambled to reposition, pulling Sergeant Alvarez toward a better evac point. He was still breathing. Barely. But time was against them. At 16:39, despite the wind still ripping across the valley, CMDR Harlan gave the order. A single HH-60 Pavehawk lifted off from a forward airstrip, threading its way through tight weather corridors that most pilots wouldn't dare. 20 minutes later, the bird touched down long enough for a quick extract. Alvarez was stabilized en route and flown to a forward surgical team before being moved to Bagram for long-term care. In the after-action report, Harlan didn't bury the detail. He put it at the top. The shot that turned the tide. The analyst who wasn't just intel. He signed the report himself. Back at base, the Remington MSR was pulled from the weapons cage. No one else touched it. It was mounted in the team room, high on the wall above a simple plate that read 2,300 meters. Storm. One shot. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Some were still skeptical, but the ones who'd seen the drone footage, the mission logs, and the final result didn't question it. Within weeks, Eliza Morales was reassigned. She didn't ask. She didn't push. But her name moved from intelligence support to direct action, from the watch floor to the field. And when she walked into her new unit, one of the SEALs from Talwara stood up and gave her a simple nod. No words, just respect. Later, they'd joke and call her one of us. But deep down, they all knew she hadn't become part of their team that day. She'd saved it. The sun hadn't fully broken over the range yet. At 7:15 a.m., the light was soft, casting long shadows across the dirt berms of the sniper training field. A fresh layer of dust rose behind every round, hanging in the air like memory. Eliza Morales stood behind the firing line, arms folded, watching a group of young recruits settle behind their scopes. One of them, fresh-faced, barely 20, looked up between shots and asked her quietly what the hardest part of being a sniper was. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down the line, watched the rhythm of breath and trigger, the quiet pressure they all put on themselves to hit something they couldn't touch. And for a second, she was back in that storm. Mud on her elbows, wind in her teeth, that weight in her chest, not from the rifle, but from knowing the entire outcome depended on what she chose to do next. Finally, she spoke. She told the young man that making the shot isn't the hardest part. That's just physics, practice, repetition. What's hard is getting the world to believe you have the right to even hold that rifle, to stand in that place, to be trusted with that decision. Then, harder still, is choosing to take it, not because someone told you to, but because you knew you could, and you knew you had to. She let the silence settle after that. Let the weight of it fill the air, like the scent of cordite. Then she smiled. Small, honest, and just whispered, "That's the part no one trains you for."